I was 27 years old when Mason asked me to help him shoot photos of an old farmhouse. That was 3 years ago, and I still haven't fully processed what happened that day. I'm telling this story now because I need someone else to know, and maybe understand why I haven't been back to Kentucky since, and why I don't think I ever will. Mason and I had been friends since college. He'd gotten into photography seriously, the kind of work where you document properties for developers and real estate companies. It wasn't glamorous work, but it paid. When he texted me saying he had a job photographing a farmhouse outside a small town called Clay Ridge, Kentucky, and asking if I wanted to help carry gear for a couple $100, I said yes without hesitation. I just switched jobs and had a strange stretch of downtime. It sounded simple. One afternoon in a dusty old place, some easy money, then food on the way home. What I didn't know was how that afternoon would change everything. We left late in the morning in Mason's SUV. The first hour was freeway smooth, predictable, normal. Then the roads got smaller. Traffic thinned out. Trees pressed in closer on both sides. By the time we hit Clay Ridge, I felt like we'd driven into a pocket of time that had forgotten to move forward. A handful of run-down stores, one gas station, empty streets that looked frozen in the 1980s. We stopped for drinks, and Mason asked the cashier if he knew anything about the property we were heading to. The guy just blinked at him and muttered something vague about old land before ringing us up. Not exactly helpful. Not exactly reassuring either. The GPS led us past town onto endless back roads lined with fields that looked more like overgrown yards than actual farms. Rusted tractors sat abandoned in the tall grass. Sheds had collapsed under their own weight. Patches of forest pressed right up against the road in places. In some spots, branches scraped the sides of the car unless you drove perfectly centered in the lane. I kept checking my phone for signal. Not because I had anyone to text, just because it felt better knowing I could reach the outside world if something went wrong. The directions ended at a narrow gravel drive that was half hidden by weeds. No mailbox, no gate, just a path that looked more like a deer trail than an actual driveway. We slowed to a crawl. The tires crunched over loose stone. Tree branches tapped against the windshield like they were trying to get our attention. Then the trees opened up, and there it was. The house stood dead center in a small clearing, like it had been waiting for us. 2 stories. Pale siding that might have been yellow once, now faded to bone white. The roof sagged to one side. The porch looked soft enough to fall through, but it still held together. No power lines, no satellite dish, just a lonely structure cut off from everything, sitting in absolute silence. Mason and I exchanged a glance, the kind you give when something feels off, but you can't quite articulate why. We parked and got out. The silence was immediate and complete. Not country quiet where you hear wind or insects. This was flat quiet, dead quiet, like the clearing was on mute. Mason didn't say anything. He just opened the hatch and started pulling out gear. The porch groaned under our weight as we climbed the steps, but it held. When Mason turned the knob, the door opened without any resistance, like someone had been expecting us. Inside, I expected dust and cobwebs, maybe evidence of raccoons or other animals. Instead, the house looked like someone had stepped out a minute ago and would be back any second. Furniture was upright. Cushions were arranged neatly on the couch. A coat hung on the back of a chair by the entrance. In the kitchen, dishes sat in a drying rack, clean and polished. By the back door, brown leather shoes were lined up in a perfect row, toes pointed outward, no dust anywhere. Not on the mantel, not on the baseboards, not under the furniture. The air was still and heavy, like the house was holding its breath. Mason started setting up his camera equipment in the parlor. A wide archway opened to a narrow staircase that curved up to the second floor. The banister was intact. The steps were scuffed, but not rotting. I turned toward the entryway to grab another bag from the car. When I looked back, the staircase was gone. In its place was a smooth white wall. Fresh plaster, seamless, like it had always been there. My heart did something it shouldn't have done. It skipped, then thudded slowly in my chest. I called Mason over, trying to keep my voice steady. He glanced at the wall, then at me. His eyes went flat. "Probably just another room," he said. But his voice didn't match his words. I walked back toward the entryway, changing my angle. From that perspective, the stairs were there again. Same lean, same railing. Every detail exactly as it had been. I stepped back into the parlor. The wall returned. Just like that. Stairs gone. White plaster. My hands started shaking. Mason gave a half laugh the kind people make when they're trying to convince themselves everything is normal. "Old house weirdness," he said. "Probably trick lighting. Probably the way the shadows fell." We moved to the kitchen to start shooting. He set up his tripod. I opened a cupboard to clear the frame for photos. That's when I found the letters. Dozens of them. Stacks and stacks of envelopes, each tied together with brittle string. They were yellowed and old, all addressed to someone named Evelyn Hayes. The postmarks ranged from the 1920s all the way to last year. One even had a forever stamp. I closed the cupboard gently and leaned against the counter, trying to process what I'd just seen. My chest felt tight, like someone had hooked their hand under my ribs and was pulling upward. Then came the sound. 2 slow, heavy steps from above. Not creaks. Not the shifting of old wood. Real steps. Deliberate. Weighted. The kind of sound someone makes when they're walking across a floor. I looked up. The kitchen ceiling was unfinished and spots open beams visible, but the sound came from the solid part where nothing should be above it, where there was only empty space and sky. Mason heard it too. His whole body went rigid. His eyes locked onto the ceiling. We didn't speak. We just started repacking fast, moving toward the front door. I reached for the knob only to find another wall. Fresh plaster. Cold. Seamless. We tried every door. The kitchen led to a hallway we hadn't seen before. It curved into a den, then back into the parlor. Every path looped us back to the same place. The house had changed. The layout had shifted. We were trapped in a loop, moving through rooms that didn't connect the way they should. Then the stairs were there again, and halfway down stood a woman. She was perfectly still, hands folded at her waist. A long gray dress reached her ankles. Her eyes tracked us without blinking. Her face was calm, too calm, unnaturally calm. She didn't move. She didn't speak. She just stood there, watching us with an expression that suggested she'd been waiting. Mason whispered something I couldn't catch. Some curse or prayer. We didn't think. We bolted straight toward her, toward the front door that had to be beyond her. The air thickened as we approached. It felt heavy, like pushing through water. My shoulder brushed her dress as we passed. It was cold, damp, like the fabric had been pulled from a river. The door was there. Real. The front porch was there. The steps. The car. Mason fumbled with the keys, but his hands found the right one. The engine started. Gravel sprayed behind us as we sped away down that narrow driveway, tree branches scraping the sides of the SUV as we tore through. We didn't stop until we hit the highway. I don't remember much of the drive home. Mason kept the radio on the whole time, loud, filling the silence. We haven't talked about that farmhouse since. Not really. Not with detail. I've tried to rationalize it 100 times. Told myself it was some kind of shared hallucination. Exhaustion. The isolation of that place playing tricks on our minds. But I know what I saw. I know what I felt. And I know that woman was real in whatever way things can be real in a place like that. Sometimes I look up the property online. I can never find a clear listing for it. The address doesn't show up on Google Maps. The town of Clay Ridge barely shows up on satellite view. It's like that house exists in a space that the world has forgotten about, or deliberately doesn't acknowledge. I think about Evelyn Hayes sometimes. I think about all those letters. I think about why a woman in a gray dress would be standing in a staircase that shouldn't exist, waiting. I think about that hand pulling from under my ribs, and I wonder if maybe it's still there. Mason and I are still friends, but something broke that day. We don't hang out the way we used to. We don't talk about photography or road trips or anything that might remind us of Clay Ridge. I still live my life. I go to work. I see people. But I'm not the same person I was before I walked into that farmhouse. Part of me is still standing in that parlor, watching a wall turn into stairs and back again, waiting for a woman in gray to descend and change everything. And sometimes, late at night, I wonder if she's still waiting too, still standing on those stairs, still watching. I was 27 years old when Mason asked me to help him shoot photos of an old farmhouse. That was 3 years ago. The message came from Riven, someone I hadn't talked to in years. He'd been friends with my cousin in high school. We'd hung out a few times at bonfires and basement parties, but we were never close. So when he texted me out of the blue, it caught me off guard. He said he knew about some side work through an old connection clearing out a house near Heradsburg. The owners were out of the picture. Just needed someone to haul junk so the place could be sold. Pretty simple, he'd said. No one else wants to drive out there. That probably should have told me something. But my rent was already late, and I needed the money desperately. So I told him I'd take it without asking too many questions. He gave me an address and directions. No GPS out there. I drove in my truck with the windows down, watching the world get smaller and emptier the farther I got from town. By the time I reached the property, it was almost 4 in the afternoon. The driveway was cracked like dried-out skin, weeds sprouting through the splits, brushing against my undercarriage as I pulled in. The house sat set back from the road, half swallowed by tall grass and overgrown trees. 2 stories. Gray paint peeling in long strips. The porch slouched to one side like it had given up trying to stay level. There wasn't a car in sight. No welcome committee. No locked gate or sign of life. Just the house sitting there, waiting. The front door was already slightly open. I cut the engine and sat with my hand still on the wheel for a moment. I wasn't nervous yet, just alert. That feeling you get when something is off, but you can't explain why. I got out anyway, walked up the porch steps carefully. Some boards groaned like they were ready to give way. I called out, "Hey, Riven, you here?" Nothing. No echo. No rustling upstairs. No creaking floors. Just silence, so thick that even my own breath sounded out of place. Inside, the air was warm and stale, like it hadn't moved in years. Furniture was draped in those stiff old sheets that always looked more like shrouds than covers. Some had slipped off. One arm of a recliner stuck out, twisted at an odd angle, like it had been dragged and abandoned. Light came through the blinds in thin, pale strips, barely reaching the corners. Everything smelled dry dust, wood rot, and something metallic underneath it all. Something that didn't belong. I noticed markings on the walls as I passed the living room. At first, they looked like smudges, like someone had been wiping grime away in circles. Then I realized they were too regular. Loops, overlapping, layered, like someone had been tracing the same pattern over and over with their finger, hundreds of times, until the mark became permanent. I tried not to look too long. The whole house had that feeling like it didn't want to be looked at too closely. I started with the recliner. It was heavier than I expected, and dragging it made a long, uneven scraping sound that echoed off the walls. Next was a half-rotted bookshelf, awkward to move. Every movement sounded too loud, like the house was listening. By the time I'd moved a few pieces to the porch, I was sweating and breathing shallow. I checked my phone. No bars. No signal. I sighed and looked up. The front door was shut. I hadn't touched it. I walked over and put my hand on the knob. It felt wrong. Not just cold. It was slick, oily, like it had been dipped in something that shouldn't be there. I jerked my hand back and wiped it on my jeans without thinking. When I turned around, the hallway was different. It had run to the left. I was sure of it. Now it curved off to the right. I stood there trying to make sense of it, even tilted my head like maybe I'd gotten turned around. But the furniture was still where I'd left it. Only the hallway had flipped. The layout had shifted. Maybe I'm just overtired, I muttered. But my body didn't believe it. Every muscle was tense, like I was waiting to be hit. Still, I went back in. I wasn't about to drive 2 hours home with nothing to show for it. I needed that money. I headed toward the dining room and grabbed the table. As I lifted one end, I glanced at the window and froze. It showed the backyard, dead pines and overgrown brush. But I was sure this room had faced the front yard before, the driveway. Now it showed the trees from the other side of the house. I set the table down gently and stepped back. That was the moment I stopped trying to rationalize it. Something was wrong here. And it wasn't just me being tired or stressed. The walls shifted when I wasn't looking. The rooms moved. The house was changing. Then I saw the footprints. They were faint in the dust, small bare feet, like a child's, maybe 6 or 7 years old. Not fresh, but they overlapped mine, which didn't make sense. I hadn't seen them before I came in. They led into a hallway I hadn't gone down, one that hadn't been there earlier. I followed them. They stopped at a door under the staircase, one I hadn't noticed when I came in. Rusted hinges. Fresh marks where nails had been pulled out. The wood around the frame was scratched, like something had been clawing at it from the inside. I don't know why I opened it. My hand just moved. Behind it, a staircase led down. Not like a normal basement staircase. Narrow, steep, too steep. The walls closed in on either side, like walking down into a throat. I stepped slowly, feeling each board shift under my weight. The air was cold and flat, like it had never been breathed. At the bottom, a hallway stretched out. Too long, longer than the house could possibly hold. At the end, a small figure stood motionless in the shadow. A little girl, white dress, pale skin, completely still. She didn't speak, didn't move. Just stood there like she'd been waiting for someone to find her. I blinked. She was gone, and in her place, something else stood. Something taller, human-shaped, but bent wrong. Like it had been cooked and left to cool in the wrong position. Its skin was blackened and cracked like burnt paper. Where its face should have been, there was just absence. A void, a space where something shouldn't be missing. It didn't move. But I did. I turned and ran. Hallways branched in directions that hadn't existed before. My footsteps echoed wrong. I slipped on the stairs, hit the wall, caught myself, and kept going. I burst into what might have been the entryway. But now the front door opened into a solid wall. I slammed my fist into it. The drywall cracked, then broke. Behind it was wood, etched with those same looping symbols. Hundreds of them, maybe thousands, some carved fresh, some still wet. Then came the knocking, slow, deliberate. 1, 2, 3, 4. I didn't wait for a 5th knock. I ran to the nearest window and threw myself through it. Glass sliced my arm open, but I barely felt the pain. I landed hard in dried grass and broken branches, rolled, and got to my feet. I sprinted for the truck without looking back. My hands were shaking so badly, it took 3 tries to get the key in the ignition. The engine caught, I threw it in reverse and tore down that cracked driveway, gravel spraying behind me. I didn't stop until I hit the main road. I sat there for a long time, just breathing, just trying to process what I'd seen, what I'd felt, the way the house had moved around me, the little girl in white, that thing standing in the darkness at the end of that impossible hallway. I never went back. I called Riven and told him I couldn't finish the job. He didn't ask questions, which told me he already knew, that he'd known all along. I never asked him about it, and he never brought it up again. Our conversation just ended. I still live in the same city. I still need money, but I don't take jobs that require me to go out to that part of the county. I don't drive past that road, and I don't look up what happened to that house or who lived there before. Sometimes I think about that little girl. I think about those symbols carved into the wood. I think about that thing standing in the darkness, waiting. And I wonder how many people Riven has sent to that house. How many people have thrown themselves through windows trying to escape. I'm not the same person I was before that day. Part of me is still running down those hallways. Part of me is still staring at that void where a face should be. And sometimes, late at night, I hear that knocking. Slow, deliberate. 1, 2, 3, 4. Just waiting for 5. Just waiting for me to answer. I was 31 years old when the letter arrived. I'm telling this now because I need someone to understand what happened in that house and why I can never go back. Why I don't even drive past that road anymore. The letter came out of nowhere. Turns out I had an aunt named Geneva who I never knew existed. She'd left me a house, a real house, mine, no rent, no mortgage. Just a deed yellowed with age and a brass key taped to a piece of lined paper with 2 handwritten sentences. You may enter. You must not stay overnight. I should have hesitated. I should have asked questions. But I didn't. I wasn't in a good place, recently divorced. Delivering groceries just to scrape by. Sleeping on a friend's pull-out couch that creaked like it had a personal grudge against sleep. When I thought about actually owning something, a place that was mine, with no one to answer to, it felt like I'd hit a strange, sad jackpot. The house was buried on a forgotten country road in rural Kentucky, hidden behind a rusted iron gate so overgrown with vines, it looked like it had melted into the earth. When I pulled up the first time, it didn't feel haunted. It felt stubborn. 3 stories tall, like it had been trying to stand straight for decades under rain and cold. The porch sagged. The paint was weathered to gray. But there was something solid about it, something that had endured. The front door had no knob, just a keyhole and a brass plate with Geneva etched into it, the letters almost worn away by time. I turned the key. The door opened like the house had been holding its breath for me. Inside, the air smelled of cedar and something old like an antique trunk you forgot to throw out decades ago. The wood floors were surprisingly well kept. Heavy curtains hid the windows, as though the house didn't want to be seen either. No electricity, no working plumbing, but structurally it seemed sound. Just dust, a bit of mildew in the corners, and the kind of quiet where even shuffling your feet sounds loud. That first night, I laid my sleeping bag in the parlor and listened to the house settle around me. Rural quiet isn't peaceful. It's thick. It lets in sounds you didn't think were possible. Boards settling, wind muttering into cracks, occasional tapping like branches rapping at the siding. Probably nothing, I told myself. Probably just the house adjusting to having someone inside. On night 2, I moved upstairs. 5 bedrooms, most still full of furniture. I chose one with a canopy bed, even though I hated canopies. Found an old wardrobe that smelled of mothballs and faint perfume Geneva's perfume, I realized. In the hallway, I found an oil lamp and placed it on the knitstand. It flickered, but didn't go out. At about 2:45 in the morning, I woke up. No sound woke me. It was just wrong. Like I'd stepped out of a dream into something too big and cold. The lamp was out. The wardrobe door was open. I hadn't touched it. I told myself it was loose, that it had drifted open in some imperceptible draft. I locked it, checked for air movement. Airtight. 10 minutes later, I woke again. The door was open. This time, I didn't bother closing it. I just laid there in the dark, listening to the house breathe around me. By night 3, I gave up on sleep entirely. I grabbed a flashlight to explore, desperate for something to do besides lie in bed and stare at darkness. The basement was exactly what you'd expect. Stone walls, damp smell, shelves lined with glass jars containing things I couldn't name, preserved things. I didn't linger. Then I went up to the attic. The door wasn't locked, but it fought me like it was the house's last defense. When it finally opened, a wave of warmth met me. Not heat, more like someone had just left the room. The air was still settling from their presence. There was a mirror in the corner, covered with a gray sheet. When I got close, it seemed to pulse, like it was breathing, like something was alive behind the cloth. I pulled it off. The mirror was spotless, polished, like it had just been cleaned, but the reflection was wrong. The attic in the glass was deeper, darker, the corners warped, the rafters bent at angles that shouldn't be possible. And then, behind me in the reflection, another version of me appeared. It was smiling. A smile I'd never made. A smile that didn't belong on my face. I spun around. No one was there. Just the empty attic. When I looked back at the mirror, the reflection was just the empty room again. My reflection was normal. Terrified, but normal. I covered the mirror and left. I didn't sleep that night. I just sat in the parlor with my flashlight, waiting for morning. That next day, I drove to town and bought supplies like I was preparing for war. A generator, cases of canned food, a new lock, though I still didn't know why. I told myself I'd stay one more night, maybe 2. Then I'd figure out what to do with this place. That night, the house didn't wait for me to figure anything out. At exactly 3 a.m., the power flickered and died. My flashlight sputtered and went black. I reached for the oil lamp on the nightstand. It was gone. The bedroom door stood open. Moonlight or something like it filtered through, bluish and thin and wrong. Then I saw them. Portraits. Dozens of them. They hadn't been there before. Men, women, children, dressed in pale, old-fashioned clothes. Faces frozen mid-sentence or mid-cry. Eyes mismatched. Some too big, some missing entirely. Mouths open just enough, like they were still whispering for help, still begging. The floor felt damp under my feet. Wet. I looked down and didn't see anything, but I could feel the moisture soaking through my socks. I turned. The hallway was gone, replaced by absolute black. I ran to the parlor. The curtains were gone. Every window showed a gray void. Nothing beyond them. Just gray. The front door had no knob, just smooth wood. And in the corner, the mirror again. Uncovered, glowing faintly. I stared. My reflection didn't move. Not at first. Then its eyes opened slowly, deliberately, like it was waking up. It grinned. Not my grin. Something else's grin. It pointed behind me. I turned. The portrait stood behind me, smiling, waiting. I don't remember how, but I was suddenly back in the attic. The mirror glowed brighter. The reflection shifted. The attic door behind me, the one I'd come through, opened, but only in the glass. My double stepped through. Exactly me. No blinking, no hesitation. Just walking toward me with that same impossible smile. I screamed and fell backward. Then the real attic door creaked open. I didn't look back. I ran. The halls twisted in directions that shouldn't exist. Portraits stretched across the ceilings now, upside down, all smiling down at me. The front door opened, but instead of the outside, it led into the same hallway. Same portraits. Same me standing at the end, waiting. I collapsed in the kitchen, gasping, begging. I promised I would leave. I promised I would never come back. I promised anything, everything. Then came footsteps upstairs. Slow, measured, patient, like something was taking its time, coming for me deliberately. I grabbed a kitchen knife and fled to the basement. The door slammed behind me. Jars rattled on the shelves. One fell and shattered. Inside was a human tooth. Another jar fell. A fingernail. Then hair. Then bone. Small bones. Child-sized. I don't want to remember what came next. I beat at the basement door until it opened. Above me, silence. Stillness. I ran through what felt like daylight, though I knew it was still 3 a.m., and I didn't stop until I reached a road. A trucker picked me up and dropped me at a diner 10 miles away. I left everything behind, my sleeping bag, my supplies, my keys. I didn't go back. Not once. I'm 37 now. I haven't sold the house. I can't. No one will buy it. The deed is still in my name. Sometimes I get letters addressed to the property. I burn them without opening them. I don't drive past that road. I don't think about the portraits or the mirror or what was in those jars. And I especially don't think about that thing wearing my face, still standing in that attic, still waiting. But sometimes, late at night, I wonder if something is still walking around in that house. If my reflection ever left that mirror. If Geneva's house is still there, patient and hungry, waiting for the next person to arrive with a key and nowhere else to go. Waiting for someone desperate enough to stay. I wasn't desperate enough, but I know others will be. And the house will be ready. I was 31 years